Could we see a massive blockbuster deal involving Mitch Marner heading to the Vegas Golden Knights? We're going to talk about today one NHL reporter and insider that feels like it's a likely possibility and his prediction of what the return package might be. It might surprise you. We'll discuss how this could work and what we might see coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have an interesting trade idea to talk about here today, and it comes from a well-connected NHL reporter / insider here on what he thinks is going to happen in the Mitch Marner situation with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, of course, we know that the Toronto Maple Leafs have made it clear with Brendan Shanahan, Brad Treliving, that everything is on the table, and certainly a case here where we're expecting to see some form of a significant change. Now, what exactly that change ends up being, we don't really know just yet. We do know that there's a good possibility based on a number of connected insiders that, the top four forwards that we often refer to as the core four, being Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, and Marner, won't all return. We also know that Matthews and Nylander recently signed long-term deals and are the least likely to be moved. I just don't see it happening at all. And between Mitch Marner and John Tavares, well, there's no doubt which player would have the much better value. I mean, I guess, is it possible the Leafs could talk to both guys about waiving? It's possible. But considering Tavares is the captain, has 1 year left, is much older than Marner, he's still a good player, but not like he was in his prime, and Marner right now is certainly the stronger player by quite a large margin, I think it's fair to say. So certainly, like, the return, the value, everything there points to being much, much more likely that Marner just makes more sense. Now, of course, at the end of the day, all these guys have forms of no trades or no move clauses, and, well, they have a lot of say in what happens. So, if they absolutely reject possible trades, there's nothing the Leafs can do about it. And it's just that simple. We could see a return based on that. But I know one NHL reporter who made a spicy, saucy type of prediction on a recent appearance on a podcast or a radio show that becomes a podcast as well on Sportsnet, made things really, really interesting to talk about. Now, we've talked before about some potential landing spots for Marner should a trade go down. I know when the first kind of was being the hot topic here when the Leafs were first eliminated from the playoffs, there was a Sportsnet article we looked at from Luke Fox that had 4 likely destinations. We looked over those. We've heard a bit about, and I've certainly talked about this team before. Like, we know that Marner to Vegas isn't a brand new topic here, but we've talked about possibility of the new team in Utah wanting to make a big splash. We've talked about Columbus under new management and having lots of prospects might want to make a big splash. We've talked about the Seattle Kraken really needing to take a step forward and add a big offensive star. We've talked about other teams too. Even the possibility of heading down to like Florida, because we know Bill Zito seems to be aggressive and is involved with everything. And you might wonder, well, how could he do that? And the question is tough to answer. It's just that simple. How could Bill Zito pull that off? Well, we don't know, but it seems like they are a team that you've heard out there. But this connected insider being Dennis Bernstein of the fourthperiod.com, who certainly has the most of his sources, the most of his intel that seems to be bang on and seems to be pretty much the most accurate. It seems to be from the West Coast and Western Conference, because that's where he's based out of, a lot around the California teams and Vegas and that whole area in the western part of the U.S. there. So certainly I take this with the fact that he probably has a little bit of intel, probably not enough to say that this is anywhere near certain, of course, because I think it's too early in the process for any reporter or insider to say they're certain of what's going to go down. I don't think anybody can say that with certainty, but his gut feeling says that Mitch Marner to the Vegas Golden Knights is a very likely possibility. It makes a ton of sense for both sides, and after listening to his rationale, you can't help but tend to agree. Now, a couple things why he feels Vegas is a good landing spot. For one, look at the Vegas Golden Knights history. The entire time they've been in the NHL, every time a big name player becomes available, either like a really big name through UFA or trade, they're always involved, and that's how they've gotten most of their stars, like Mark Stone, Jack Eichel, Alex Pietrangelo. These guys all came in as trades and free agent signings. Like, they are not afraid to pull off the big deal. Like, look at the deadline. They went and got Tomas Hertl. Could Marner be the next, big time high-paid player to make his way to Vegas and add to their collection of shiny toys that they like there. I mean, like, they're, Stanley Cup champions last year. They're aggressive, they're cold-blooded, and they're not afraid to do things this way. Another couple of points Bernstein made was that some of these players might not be opposed to leaving Vegas as much as they love it there. He suggested that Bruce Cassidy can be a difficult coach to get along with, and that there's some guys that, as much as they like playing there and obviously they enjoy their success, that, like some guys that just don't work well with the coach, and there's a few in that category. He also mentions that there's some that are quite unhappy right now that Jonathan Marchessault is unsigned. Obviously, it doesn't mean he won't get signed, but there's a possibility that Marchessault could walk as a UFA. The fact that he's kind of been strung along and not given an extension ahead of time after being last year's playoff MVP, and after another solid campaign this year, that there's players on the team, according to Bernstein, that are not happy about it. And we've heard off and on in the last few years about how some of the players there are treated. I mean, like I said, look at Marc-Andre Fleury. He went from being the darling of the team and the owner's favorite. Even the owner was like, he loved Fleury, but they needed the cap space, and they were cold-blooded and moved them. It's just that simple. Like, they're not afraid to be this way. This is all business, all about winning, and not so much about personal relationships. And, they have a different approach in that sense. And you got to wonder, because they have been very, very successful. Now, according to Dennis Bernstein, a couple of names to watch that would be real easy to include to make the math work would be Shea Theodore, who's got 1 year left at $5.2 million, and William Karlsson, who's got 3 years left at $5.9 million. So that's over $10 million going out. Marner makes just a hair shy of 11. That's pretty much almost the same salary. So from a money perspective, both of these teams could make this deal real easy. The Maple Leafs get themselves a top pair defenseman in Shea Theodore, great skater, great puck mover, good offensive skills, good size. There's lots to like about Theodore's game, very underrated. And in William Karlsson, they get themselves a real good centerman. He's had some years have been better than others in Vegas, but this past year he had 30 goals, 30 assists. He had a 40-goal campaign when he first started there. Works hard and become a pretty good two-way player too. Karlsson could be a real good middle six player for Toronto. It really would add to their depth for sure. If they'd have an option maybe of that point of considering playing Tavares on the wing. Now, of course, we don't know at this point if Domi and Bertuzzi are going to be back in Toronto. There's still a lot of uncertainty there. I think there's mutual interest to bring both guys back if they can figure out the right deal. But, if you do, then maybe you are less likely to move Tavares to the wing. But even if you do, it just creates much better forward depth. You can kind of create more pairs, so to speak, and kind of have your third player on the line to kind of fill in. You can have your Matthews and your Nylanders and your Tavares and all these guys kind of play like lead separate lines, so to speak. Domi, Bertuzzi, I wonder how much of a breakout year Bobby McMahon will have us, next year in Toronto. He had a real good showing this past year. He could be an underrated guy to help them next year too. So, but William Karlsson could be a real nice addition. Now, he does have a modified no trades, a 10-team list that he can block. I have no idea what teams are on it or if he's opposed to coming to Canada or any of those things. Certainly would be a bit of a pay cut for him because he'd be going from a no state tax to a higher taxed area in Ontario, but it's an interesting package. Now, Dennis Bernstein even goes on to talk about the possibility that maybe instead of Theodore and Karlsson, it becomes for Pietrangelo. Now, Pietrangelo's a right shot, cup-winning defenseman on multiple teams. He was a captain in St. Louis, and he said that he wouldn't be shocked if he was the guy, and even if he had to waive that. Like I said, some of these guys in Vegas are, finding either some of them are, I guess you could say, finding it difficult working with the coach, and some of them are just not thrilled with how they do business there. Like, essentially, now Pietrangelo would understand this better than most, but a lot of the guys that were, originals, which there's not too many left, they're at a point where they see all these other players coming in as trade pieces that they were acquired. They seem to get looked after better than the ones that are there all along. So, like Pietrangelo comes in with a massive contract out of free agency. They trade for Mark Stone and then sign him to a massive long-term deal. Jack Eichel comes in as a trade, a $10 million contract. A lot of these guys are just getting rewarded, and it's all about the next best thing. Like Pietrangelo won a cup 2 years ago, was a huge part of that team in Vegas. And so after a couple of years before that, he was the captain of the Blues winning the Stanley Cup. So at the end of the day, Pietrangelo would be a huge piece. Like we talked before about the Leafs, and obviously, to win the formula to win a cup. If you look at the breakdown, a lot of these teams that have won recently, you don't always need elite goaltending. There's some exceptions to that. Like look at the Lightning with Vasilevsky. He's been elite, was a huge part of their wins. But look when Colorado won with Darcy Kemper, he was not elite. You could look at even when Vegas won last year with Adin Hill had some elite moments, but not considered an elite long-term goaltender. So you're looking at some guys that are either inexperienced or possibly just average. You don't always need elite goaltending, but you do need a couple of stud defenders and a couple of stud elite forwards. And certainly the Leafs, to get better, there's lots of good forwards that fall into the elite category, but not so much in the back end. If they were to swap, like a lot of people have been saying it for years, if they move one of those top forwards for like a real stud defenseman, that might be the difference for them. If they can solidify their goaltending, which we know they need to do something to bring in another goalie to work with Joseph Woll. If they can solidify that and bring in a stud right defenseman like Pietrangelo, that could be either way. Either way, I think they would be a deeper team with this trade, no matter what the return is. If it's Pietrangelo or if it's Theodore Karlsson. Theodore Karlsson gets some two pieces. You can make an argument that Theodore is a different kind of D to some extent, not exact same as Pietrangelo. They play a lot together. But I don't know. I mean, when they signed Noah Hannafin, to me, that just signaled to me that Theodore likely wasn't coming back. He's got 1 year left on his contract. I don't think Theodore was going to be extended. I honestly think that there was the next big player coming in. Like, again, Hannafin comes in as a trade, gets rewarded, whereas Theodore is not extended. Another prime example of that. I can see why the players that have been there longer, why that would be frustrating to them. They put in all this time, do all this stuff to help the franchise win, and then don't get rewarded. Like, I'd be real curious to see what happens if Marchessault does not stay, if he doesn't get looked after and ends up hitting the market and leaving, what that'll do for some of the other longer-term players there. Like, if William Karlsson's not traded and then Marchessault leaves, he's going to be the last of the misfits there. So they had to move on from Riley Smith. They had to move on from Fleury. Like, they are not afraid to be aggressive, and they are not afraid here to be cold-blooded. It's just that simple. So Marner could get a contract extension. They wouldn't have to pay him quite as much because of the no state tax, so they could probably get a little bit of a better deal. If you look at all the teams we've talked about with Marner having to waive his no-move clause, like some people have brought up good points. Like, do you think he's going to waive to go to Columbus? Do you think he's going to waive to go to Utah? Like, he may not. I mean, to me, I said, well, one thing he might like about some of those places is that it's a lot quieter, can fly under the radar, can be a good hockey player, not get all the noise you get in Toronto. And to me, that can be, for some of these guys, they don't handle it well, and it can be stressful and add extra added pressure. But I'm not sure. At the same time, though, if winning is more important to him, then he may want to go to a more established team. So everybody seems to want to go to Vegas. Like, I've never heard of a player rejecting a trade because Vegas was on their no trade list, right? So you talk to Marner and propose to him something like this, where he can get a long-term deal, go to a team that contends year after year, get to play with some really good players. What's not to like? I think Mitchie would be more willing to entertain that. I really do. And no matter how you shake it here, these returns make a ton of sense. The Leafs, I do think, as much as they would miss Marner's play on the PK, they'd miss his ability to set up guys and help produce offense. They'd have more money to play around with and add more depth. Karlsson, Theodore is a great package, and they both come with Stanley Cups on their resume. And they come with a lot of playoff experience. I think it'd be great. And even better if you can get Pietrangelo. There was a point before Pietrangelo went to Vegas. There was some talk and speculation about him maybe returning home to Ontario and maybe going to play for the Leafs. I mean, he is from, I believe he's from King City, which isn't far from there. So, like, you know, for all intents and purposes, Toronto's his hometown. So he may not be opposed to that either, especially if he does, and I can't speak for him. I don't know if he finds it frustrating working with Bruce Cassidy, but according to Bernstein, there are some players that kind of feel that way, which is why he suggested Pietrangelo may be willing to leave more than people realize. So again, we'll see. Very interesting trade prediction proposal here from Bernstein. Makes a ton of sense to help both sides. Let me know what you think down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll be back with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Another video coming later today as well. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.